I need to nip to the loo, so I'm going to stop the video as well.
Okay. Right. Well, off we go then. Falkner family history, part 2. Part 1 was delivered at a meeting of Leslie and Nora Falkner's grandchildren back in December, just before Christmas, when I spoke about what are and gave a little bit about information about origins. Well, tonight I prepared a presentation about our great-great-grandparents, just in case there was time and inclination. So I thought it'd been a shame not to present it at some time. So here we go with our great-great-grandparents. So these are the Falkners, the Greens on the Falkner side, and the Addiscotts and the Rocketts on the Addiscott side of the family. So just to fill everyone in on where it all fits, we're the first generation on the left hand side here. Then the second generation is our parents, which is for us Betty and Ruth and David, and our grandparents Leslie Falkner and Nora Addiscott, and then what we were speaking about on the first presentation mainly were our great-grandparents Walter Falkner and Jessie Green, and William Addiscott and Beatrice Rockett. This evening we're going one generation further back, and so I propose to go through these 4 sets of great-great-grandparents. Inevitably there'll be a little bit of overlap with what I said on the first presentation, just to maintain some continuity, and but it'll be looking really at these people and their families, their children, is what I propose to look at this evening. So I'll work down this list. So we'll start with the Falkners, then the Greens, then the Addiscotts, and then the Rocketts. So kicking off with John William Falkner and Emma Beach. These were the parents of Walter Falkner, which was the father of Leslie Falkner, our grandfather. So we're into really Victorian and Edwardian times across the board here. So most of these people's lives pretty much spanned the reign of Queen Victoria. Most of them went into the reign of Edward VII. So William was the son of, John was the son of William Falkner and Elizabeth Mitchell, and Emma was the daughter of John Beach and Elizabeth Ireson, Ireson being quite a rare name. Not very many of them around, especially spelt that way. There's more spelt Ireson, very, very few Iersons, but of course once you start getting back into the early 1800s when people couldn't write, then you were just reliant on the people that could write getting it written down one way or the other, and obviously getting it mixed up sometimes. So John William Falkner here on the right, and Emma on the left. So this is John's birth certificate. He said father William Falkner, who was a carpenter and an undertaker, and he was born at Poplar Row, which was just off the New Kent Road, very, very close to the Elephant and Castle. Looking at a map, just to the right hand side of Elephant and Castle comes out the New Kent Road, which then leads into the Old Kent Road. And this is where his father had his business at the time, his building business at the time when John was born. He'd moved from just a road off Tooley Street in the 1830s when they started to build London Bridge railway station. So he had to move out of that location, and he set up his building business there in Poplar Row, which is where John was born. Emma, she was the daughter of a successful leather dresser, John Beach, working in Bermondsey. It's interesting to see that even the district in which she was born was called the Leather Market at Bermondsey. So Bermondsey was must have been quite a interesting place, to say the least, with so much leather industry. It must have been, the smells must have been quite overpowering. They were towards the south side of Bermondsey, away from the River Thames. And Emma was born in Wright's Buildings, which is where the leather business was at the time. Quite a fire occurred there, which forced the move of the business into Willow Walk, which is where she spent most of her childhood. But she was actually born at Wright's Buildings, which is in Grange Road. Grange Road still exists. Wright's Buildings don't. And then they were married at good old Surrey Tabernacle, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, worshipping at the Surrey Tabernacle was really the main driver of bringing these people together, to know each other and to marry. At the time of their marriage in 1865, which is incidentally when the Salvation Army commenced, John was now at 9 Poplar Row rather than 14 Poplar Row, so they'd moved around a little bit in Poplar Row, and as I hinted, Emma was now living at Willow Walk, where you can see the beach leather business actually marked on maps. And so here they are, marrying at Surrey Tabernacle by James Wells, minister, and it was a double wedding with Emma's brother William, and it really must have been quite an occasion, because this is in April 1865, which was only a matter of a few weeks after this large church had opened, having moved from a previous site slightly further north. So this would have been very much the first wedding that was conducted at this brand new large chapel in Wandsey Street, and Emma was a mere 19 years old at the time. So that's what it looked like, in a bit of a forlorn state in the 1970s, and this is what it looked like in its Victorian heyday. And in terms of getting things on the map, we've got the River Thames off the map to the north. This is Southwark. This is the Elephant and Castle. This is the New Kent Road. This is the Old Kent Road, stretching down here. And so, as I say, John started his life here in Poplar Row, and when he married, he set up his business here at 54 New Kent Road. This may well have been a site that was owned by his father and was already in the family portfolio of property when he moved in. It certainly wasn't very far away from where he was brought up. Emma here in Wright's Buildings in Grange Road, moving to Willow Walk, and just a little way. The Beach family moved around various properties in this Grange Road, Willow Walk area. And then moving ahead a bit, and this is where Surrey Tabernacle was, where they got married in Wandsey Street. Moving ahead a little bit, John kicked off his business here up to 1877, and then he moved down here to Ossory Road, halfway down the Old Kent Road, and that's where he spent his his working life. And as was the case in those days, various members of the family were also living around there as well. And so this is an advert, hadn't been in business very long. This is in 1865. And so this is him finding his legs as a independent builder, trying to be a little bit independent of his father, son and successor to the late W. Falkner, builder and carpenter, house agent and undertaker, working out of 54 New Kent Road. So that's an advert that he was running quite regularly in those days. But in 1878 here, we've got a lease dated 1878, where he took out this is Ossory Road. So the New Kent Road is running down here, and this is Ossory Road, and he is taking out a lease on this property and this land behind it to run an enlarged builder's business. It's interesting that the lease was taken out from Mr. Robert Allen, the landowner. The Allens and the Falkners were quite closely, and the Beeches were quite closely interrelated. I think what was probably the case is that the Allen family owned most of the land around Ossory Road at this time. They lived at number 1 Ossory Road, so they were sort of effectively the gatekeepers to the road. And Rob Allen's son George married Emma Beech's sister, and this is George Allen when he was mayor of Croydon. So the Allens were quite a well-to-do family, and they did a lot of printing, went into were in the printing business quite heavily. But of course, that's all in the cousins area rather than direct relations, as far as we're concerned. So this is the house at 24 Ossory Road. This is a picture I took in the 1980s. I'm very glad that I did, because you go to Ossory Road now and this has all been completely levelled and redeveloped. Doesn't exist there at all. Still had a sign on the side of J.W. Falkner and Sons, and this was used as the office for the building firm that was still operating at that time with the land, with the building work still there behind, but looking a bit forlorn by now. And you can see the house next door is all boarded up. And so this wasn't really very long before the whole area was totally redeveloped. So it's good to get in and take a picture there. So this is obviously, though offices when I looked at it and went inside, this would have been where John William actually lived. There's the house again. So we're now behind the house, and this looks to me like the yard when the buildings there were under construction. Quite a poor photo here of what it was like inside. They concentrated on doing quite ornate buildings, so they got into churches and so on, and they built the governor's house at the Falklands and so on. So they specialised in doing quite crafty building work, and consequently a lot of the work actually was done off-site here and then taken down to the various building sites that they had. So everything was going quite well for them then. So moving back now just to the family. So that's the business. Now the family record. There's a lovely record here that Emma kept of all her children. You can't read it very well, but in here is when they were at the time of day that they were all born. And there's just one child, Eva Martha, that they were sadly able to also record the death of. She didn't live very long, but all the rest went on to live reasonable length of life. And this is all her grandchildren's birthdays that she wrote down. So these are the children of these are children here, and very neatly written down all the way through the year. This is our grandfather, who was her grandson, Leslie Walter, born 20th of June, to Walter Falkner, and there just above her is Beatrice's older sister on the 5th of June. And so they're all here. Victor Falkner is there somewhere. Here, Victor Montague, son of William John, who did a lot of family history and who we've got to thank most heartily for things like this actually still remaining and existing. He looked after these things most carefully, and so various photos and so on are all thanks to Victor making sure that they were kept back in the 1940s and 50s. So this is the family as they were, with Eva dying young. There was just one girl in the family. This is May here. She looks as if she's carrying a baby, but I think it's a doll. I think this is a doll's pushchair here, and I think she's actually carrying a doll there, because I've got no record of there being a child younger than Frank, who is the youngest in the family. So here they all are. This is, I believe, from the date, this will be out behind 24 Ossory Road, down where the building business was. And so this is Emma and John with their children, and here's Walter, our great-grandfather. Another picture a few years further on. By now they're all starting to get married and have children of their own. So we've got the grandparents here again, John and Emma, with the various sons and daughters-in-law and so on. Excuse me. So let's say a little bit about some of these. I won't dwell on it for too long. There isn't the time. George, he never married Kate Staines. At this time, he was friendly with Kate Staines, but they never married. Eventually, George emigrated to the United States, to New York initially. I think he went up into Canada towards the end of his life. He married 3 times married 3 times, divorced twice out in America. So it was quite a interesting lifestyle. He was something of a breakaway from the family, given the quite strong Baptist roots of his 2 parents. Herbert Thomas, Herbert, interesting character. He ran a builders merchants and specialised heavily in ironmongery, but ran a general builders merchants just across the Old Kent Road from Ossory Road, 381 and 383 Old Kent Road. Ran a very successful business there, and lived down at Coulsdon in Surrey. So it's a bit of a theme that they maintained their businesses in London, but then went off to live further south for obvious reasons. He was getting off a bus one day and was in danger of missing his train down at Coulsdon, presumably to come up to work at Old Kent Road. Stepped off the bus, 1925, not many cars around, and walked straight in front of a car and was instantly killed in 1925. So he was a victim of a road traffic accident. You can see how things have changed. Apparently, there's in the press is quite sort of emotive descriptions of his injuries. And when going through the inquest and so on, it was established that the car was travelling at about 15 miles an hour. I think these days, for the most part, people would escape with just a few bruises being hit by a car at 15 miles an hour, but in those days, that wasn't the case. So poor Herbert, he came to a very abrupt end. Alfred was the eldest son. No, he wasn't the eldest. He was the second eldest. William John was the eldest. He took over the builder's business from his father. He's the one that carried on the building firm at Ossory Road with mixed fortunes, shall we say. To be quite honest, the builder from the day he took over the business in about 1900, it was on a downward slope, to be quite honest. So he didn't really make a very good go of it, and in the end, it was taken over by the Wood family. I think that was in the 1930s. I believe it was Alfred that lent our grandfather the money to buy his house when he married, and consequently, with the business not going very well in the 1930s, he wanted his money back, which effectively forced our grandfather out of the home in which he was living back into the rented accommodation that he'd been in when he was first married, owned by Mrs. Sayers. William John, he was the eldest. He was a very successful surveyor, quantity surveyor, had his business in Westminster in London, and when he retired down to Eastbourne and became a member of the Strict Baptist Chapel at Eastbourne in his latter days. Then we've got Walter that we discussed last time, so I won't say anything more about Walter, our great grandfather. And this is Jessie, his wife. And we'll just say here's Beatrice and Gladys, the baby, and Doris. So these are three of our great aunts sitting there in front of Walter and Jessie. Oh, and by the way, William John married a king, Louisa King, and Alfred Beach married a king. Yes, Annie. So that was two brothers married two sisters. Joseph, bit of a sorry character again. He worked for his brother Herbert in this builders merchants business, but came to a sticky end, and his body was found in one of the tunnels under the River Thames. I think it was in the 1930s, and I think drink was the primary driver of his downfall. So he came to a bit of a sad end, did Joseph. May married Will Simons, so she became May Simons, and we'll see a little bit more about them in just a moment. Frank was an interesting character, Ninus, the ninth in the family, the ninth and last. Had a good army career. Here he is on his horse, and it's quite interesting to see that at this particular time he was a captain, but he'd been to Gallipoli in 1914 and clearly came out, which was an event in itself, and he became one of the commanding officers in Malta for many years. One of his children at least was born there. He had his wife out there too, and Salonika in Greece as well. But eventually he came out of the army. His army days were over. When he was a colonel, got an OBE as well. So there's plenty more research one could do on Frank if one wanted to. He went into the quantity surveying business as well when he finally finished his army career, but he certainly got up to quite high echelons in the army. Now, meanwhile, back at the Falkner business, it's amazing how fires were a feature back in the 1800s. And here we have a serious fire in the business at Ossory Road. I won't read it now, but it'll be there, obviously, in the presentation to look at later on, and in other places too, if you're interested. But this is really the sad story of how things went downhill with the business. Here we are, taking over from his father in 1900, and by 1900, if I move David out of the way a minute, 1907, we're in the bankruptcy courts, but the business survived and went on, and certainly showed a rallying for the next 20 years or so before it finally left the family. So in their retirement, John and Emma, initially in 1900, when they gave up managing the business, they went down to between Croydon and Mitcham in what was a country lane in those days, to a very lovely house called Oak Lodge. But surprisingly, they were only there for a few years, not for very long at all. Lovely house, not there for very long. They then moved back up further, back up towards London again, up into London, into Streatham, and saw out their days at a house in Streatham. So here's a picture of Oak Lodge down Beddington Lane, and there's quite a few other pictures around of it. That's just one, you know, immaculately manicured lawns and so on. Lovely, lovely place. And here's another picture of it at the front. This is in the Christmas card that they were sending round. This actually was to her daughter and her future, their future son-in-law, May and Will. This is how they constructed their Christmas card in 1902, 1903. But before 1903 was out, they were out of Oak Lodge. And I don't know whether it's anything to do with the business not going quite so well or what, but it seems strange that after only a few years at Oak Lodge, they moved into this building here at Streatham, which although it's a very nice house, doesn't sort of quite have the aura about it that Oak Lodge did. I know they wanted to get closer to Surrey Tabernacle, for instance. I think they found they'd moved a little bit far out of London in that respect, but I don't think that was the entire story by a long way. Because certainly back in 1903, May and Will were having really quite a really posh wedding. The bridesmaids, very interesting hat styles, enormous hats the bridesmaids have got. This is our Auntie B. Field, standing with great poise, as you would expect her to. I'm not entirely sure who these other bridesmaids are. We've clearly got John and Emma here, and this will be Will's parents here. Not sure who these two people are. May find out one day. But that's just one of many wedding photos that still exist. And here's another one of the guests. There's some houses behind here, so I'm given that Oak Lodge was really very much out on its own. I'm just wondering whether this is actually at Buckley Road, Streatham. This is Walter, our great grandfather. It's Auntie B again, and there's various other ones around here whose faces you can pick out as known people from other labelled up photos. So their wedding. Emma and John are buried at Nunhead Cemetery, along with many other of our relations. And on the tombstone, Eva was buried there first, their little daughter, who didn't survive long. And then you've got Emma, who died first, and then John, who died just over a year later. Neither of them very old, really, 62 and 65. I'm not going to read this out at all. It just goes just to show you that there is will, and it's proving. He left £6,241, which at today's rates is 878,000. So it's not a large amount of money, really, considering where the business was at one time. And I think it does show that even before his death, the fortunes of the family were falling away, and that's probably largely the value of the house at Buckley Road, Clovelly. Anyway, the will makes an interesting read. in due course, if anyone wants to. Also, it's worth going onto the Falkner Jarrell blog, falknerjarrell.com. Lots and lots of information on this blog. That's worth taking a look at. Quite a lot of photos of what the Falkner family business actually built, and so on. So again, I recommend. That's a great blog that's been put together. Right, moving on now to the Greens. Time hastens on. Not quite so much to say about Thomas and Phoebe. Thomas Green lived to a ripe old age, 96, and Phoebe Crowhurst, whom we know a lot about from her father and brother's diaries. And his father was James Green and Mary Elizabeth Buxton. Buxton's an interesting family. They were heavily into coach building. And then the Crowhursts from Kent, and the Weeks family from South Devon, South Hams of Devon. So Phoebe's roots of her parents are one in Kent and one in Devon. So whereas Thomas, very much London, still very London based at this time. So he was the son, Thomas, in his birth certificate, the son of James Green, a butcher, living at Northampton Place, which is also where the Buxtons lived. It was a terrace of houses right at the very top end of the Old Kent Road, just sort of where the New Kent Road comes into the Old Kent Road. And of course, they've all got Old Kent Road numbers now, which does make things quite difficult when you're doing some of these researches where the houses change their names. And Phoebe, born not far away, father described as a carpenter, very much a builder with strong carpenter credentials, also born in George Street in St Mary Newington, which is a little bit to the left, looking at a map of where Thomas was born. Here's their marriage certificate, back to the Surrey Tabernacle. This would be the old Surrey Tabernacle because it was 1863, just before it closed. And he's following in his father's footsteps. He is a butcher. And there they are. So in terms of where we are on the map, River Thames here again, Greenwich, Deptford, New Kent Road, Old Kent Road. So Thomas was born here, Northampton Place, Phoebe over here. Phoebe moved down here, right to the bottom end of the Old Kent Road, New Cross Road, before she married. And then when they married, they took up the butcher's business right down in the middle of the Old Kent Road. Again, very, very close. You see the Greens here operating very close to Ossory Road. I'm just trying to see which is Ossory Road. Dung, dung, dung. One of these roads, quite very close, is actually Ossory Road. So they were all living very, very close to each other. And then finally they moved down and spent the greater part of their life down at 222 Lewisham High Road. Their children, won't dwell on this very much because I don't know a great deal about them. I think they were all really comparatively ordinary people. Jessie there, the third one, our great grandmother. This is an interesting one. Poor little boy, didn't live very long, called James Wells Green. Well, James Wells was the pastor, the minister at Surrey Tabernacle. So they actually named one of their children after the minister, so he's called James Wells Green, but he didn't live very long. Nothing much to say about the others really. Marion Green married Edward Hammer. I had some went to see their daughter and got quite a lot of family history information from her on the Green side of the family. And we'll leave that and move on. So they're all living in and around London, and spent their lives there. So this is the builder's, the butcher's shop, looking very forlorn in 2002. But in 2012, it's obviously had a bit of a spruce up, and I think this building now, if you look now, this building's actually been demolished, so it's still standing there. Obviously not a butcher's shop in these days, but there it is. No reason to believe it's not the place that he was actually plying his trade from. 683 Old Kent Road. I haven't got a family photo of them. This is the nearest I've got with them, some members of the family. And so this is Albert's marriage, and this is Thomas and Phoebe here on the left hand side, and of course it's Albert's. But there's other ones there labelled up that are either direct relations or like Winifred is the wife of Ebenezer Green. Lived to see their golden wedding. Of course, Thomas lived a lot longer, but here they are at the time of their golden wedding in 1913. And here's Thomas again as one of the deacons at Surrey Tabernacle, and he was related by marriage or directly pretty much to all the rest of them, apart from the pastor, who by then was Obadiah Stephanus Dolby, James Wells having passed away. And of course Samuel Crowhurst here, who was the brother to his wife. So these were brothers-in-law. And Thomas Carr, I think, was another brother-in-law. Can't remember off the top of my head, but very, very closely related. Phoebe, she died from a new growth, as if she'd had one previously, malign and abdominal for 2 years, and exhaustion. So I take that to be cancer. Thomas, he died of basically his heart giving out, and finally bronchitis at the ripe old age of 96. And this is their grave down at Nunhead Cemetery. Looks in quite good condition in terms of the engraving, but you can see it's somewhat on its side in terms of how it's currently lying. Very simple gravestone, and this is the memoriam card to Phoebe. You see Phoebe Green those days. Thomas's will is fascinating. Won't go into a lot of detail here because it's there to be seen. But the interesting thing here is it was £38,270, which these days is 2.6 million. And from the amount of property that he owned, look at all these ground rents on all these properties and so on. From the properties that he owned, he clearly had a very, very successful butchery business, and it was carried on by his youngest son, but I don't know where it is now as a business. And because he lived to such a ripe old age, Jessie predeceased her father, and so she wasn't left anything directly, just her grandchildren, £1,500, I think that was each. So yes, his will is very, very comprehensive, and quite an interesting read. Again, not going to read this out now, but this is just one of about 7 pages, which is a detailed diary of his trip to Germany and Switzerland in 1882. It was something that a lot of people did in those days, and it really is fascinating reading, and very worth looking at and sitting down with an atlas to see all different places he went to. But he did this all on his own, didn't take Phoebe with him. She obviously didn't want to go, and there we are in 1882, a a very comprehensive trip round Germany and Switzerland. So that's the Falkner side. Moving on to the Addiscotts, Herbert, William Herbert and Emily. I haven't got any pictures of them, which is a shame. But here we are again, same sort of time period, Victorian, early Victorian, right the way through into Edwardian. And Emily, she lived to a ripe old age, up to 1935. So I'm sure our Grandma Falkner would have known her well. I mean, Grandma Falkner would have been in her 30s when Emily passed away. So I'm sure she had some recollections of her, but I never asked her. So I don't know, and she could well have. I think she would have remembered her grandfather as well, because they lived at Greenbank Avenue in Plymouth, and I do remember Mum saying about Grandma saying about Greenbank Avenue down in Plymouth. So I'm sure we could have found out a lot more about these two people if only we'd asked the questions beforehand. So their parents, William's parents was William Weeks Addiscott and Mary Ann Rockett, and yes, this does create quite a conundrum for the family, because that's Rocketts that we're related to through the Rocketts as well. So there's quite a lot of people being first cousins through one direction and second cousins through another, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of interrelationships between the Rocketts and the Addiscotts for us, because of this marriage of a Rockett and Addiscott before our Rocketts and Addiscotts got married. Then Richard Adams was Emily's father, and Joanna Pitts. So here's the birth certificate of William. His father was a tailor, wasn't in the Navy, and certainly tailoring is something that permeates the family quite strongly. Tailor shops and so on in and around Plymouth. That's him. And Emily, again, father being a carpenter, almost certainly associated with the dockyard, because obviously in those days ships were wooden. So obviously what catches the eye here is that they got married in a registry office. They're both 21. By now he didn't go into the tailoring business. He was a fitter at the Keyham dockyard, which was just to the north of the Devonport dockyard, River Tamar. And so we've got his father still being a tailor, of course, and him actually going into the dockyard as a fitter at this time. Married in a registry office. Why was that, we ask? And well, the answer is that she was pregnant at the time they got married, as we'll see in a minute. So here we have where they lived, and basically it's a bit complicated here, but basically they moved from left to right over the years. So William was born here, right in the heart of Devonport, and moved in up there in 1951 and into this central area. And this is where the shops and so on were, just around here where the tailoring businesses would have been taking place in Plymouth itself. There were some shops and so on in Devonport, but obviously Plymouth was a bigger urban area. And Emily was born in this area, and so geographically they were close together at the time they married, and they actually were living. Get my mouse. Yeah, living down here when they when they first married, and then they moved over to Greenbank Avenue later, and moved actually within Greenbank Avenue from number 20 to number 64. So very much Plymouth all their lives, and that's 64 Greenbank Avenue. That's where he passed away. She moved to live with one of her daughters, who was running a sort of boarding house further north in Plymouth after her husband died. But very nice road, Greenbank Avenue, still very desirable residential properties. So here's the children. So this is our great grandfather, William Richard, born 7th of May 1865, after the marriage of his parents. Easy to see here. They were married earlier in 1865. Can't quite see it there. So that would have been why it was a registry office wedding. Obviously went on to marry Beatrice Rockett. We then got second one down, Elizabeth Emily. She married John William Bickle, and we used to hear Grandma talking about Lizzie Bickle, and so this is Lizzie Bickle. John was very well respected solicitor in Plymouth, and one wonders whether there's some connectivity with William actually becoming a solicitor's clerk in London. The coincidence is there, at least, that his brother-in-law was an actual solicitor operating in Plymouth. Ida, or Edith, married a second cousin, Richard John Addiscott, who by then was up at Stratford. They moved around the country a lot. I can't quite remember what his job was now. It was a government-based job, and they really did move around the country quite a lot, and I think eventually emigrated, but I haven't got it written down here. George, don't know a great deal about him, or at least can't recall a great deal about him, and Herbert, who definitely did emigrate to Florida. So I think we ended up with 2 emigrations, and 2 stayed in Plymouth, and William went to London. I haven't got any pictures of them, I'm afraid. But William started off working at the shipyard, but got onto ships very quickly in his life, and he's got there's an amazing record of his life in the Navy, and we could dwell on this for a long time, but I won't. I mean, it just shows that he went onto a lot of ships, and my feeling is that many of those ships were ships that were actually at Portsmouth, at Plymouth at the time, and he was there as a fitter, which is basically this sort of mixture of carpentry and metalwork, because we're in this sort of transition period from wooden to iron-hulled ships. He would have gone on to ships to carry out maintenance work on them. Very short, 5 feet 5 inches, hair brown, eyes grey, complexion fair, wounds, scars and marks none. And here's a list of various ships he was on, and very good behaviour, and so on. Lots there to see. Very similar information here, so I won't dwell on it, just present it a different way. At the time of the 1871 census, he was on this ship Narcissus, and at the 1881 census, he was on this ship, the Victory Emmanuel, which looks remarkably like HMS Victory. It just goes to show how slowly things were moving in the 1800s in the Navy, and just what an amazing pace things went at from 1900s onwards to get the dreadnoughts before the First World War still sails and so on. Now, but even this ship had a screw propeller on it, so they were fitting engines into ships that say largely look like HMS Victory, which is quite an amazing situation. So here he is at the 1881 census on the Victory manual, that ship that we've just seen, and he is in Hong Kong, China, along with, and here's his entry here, William H. Addiscott, Chief, engine room artificer, married, born at Devonport, and so there he is. Artificer was just a skilled craftsman. So there he was in Hong Kong at the time of the 1881 census. They're buried, he and his wife are buried at Efford Cemetery in Plymouth. Here's their grave. It is legible, I assure you, and there's the inscription, just very simple inscription there. I believe this is the Bickle grave here, so Lizzie Bickle and her husband are buried not far away in Efford Cemetery. He made a will at today's levels. It was valued at, well, at the time it was only under £2,000, so it would have been £86,000 today. So certainly wasn't rich. And John Bickle was a solicitor. So obviously his brother-in-law was, son-in-law, sorry, was not surprisingly involved with his will. So that's the Addiscotts. Now the Rocketts. Wow. Well, yes, the Rocketts. Quite a challenge are the Rocketts. So we've got Herbert Swaffield Rockett. The asterisk means that's when he was christened rather than when he was born. Didn't live a long life. Died in 1880, whereas his wife lived to quite a good old age, up to 1909. His parents were Herbert Swaffield Rockett again, Nan Best. This Swaffield name, I think I mentioned it last time. I've had a look. I've got no idea where Swaffield comes from and why it so permeates the naming of sons in the Rockett family. Complete mystery to me. There doesn't seem to be any Swaffield surnamed relation, which would be what one would expect to see somewhere further down the generations. Complete mystery. And Rachel, John Derry, and Mary Minns were her husband. So this is all Plymouth. We're still well and truly in Plymouth. They were born before 1937, so there's only registration in parish registers. Sorry about the clock. And so here we've got the parish register of Stoke Damrell, where Herbert was christened. The record there. Mr. Hawker, very famous family of ministers, did the christening. Whereas we're into nonconformity here. Princes Street Independent Chapel was where the christening, or at least the record of the birth of Rachel took place. Quite a lot of information here about her mother's origins. This doesn't say anything really more than who it was that actually did the christening. And so nonconformity very much on the Derry side of the family, and that's it's quite interesting in that it's the only real strong information that we've got about the Baptist connections, given that when they went up to London, both Beatrice and William Richard attended Brixton Tabernacle. So it's quite interesting to see or find out more as to how their religious affiliations evolved over the years, because it's not entirely straightforward. Well, we've certainly got this link to nonconformity here anyway. She was christened, shall we say, at Princes Street Chapel, and there's clearly still a strong affinity there as they were married there 26 years later. He was actually working at the dockyard as a smith, as following in his father's footsteps, and her father was a shipwright. So they weren't actually on board ships, but working heavily at the dockyard. Who these people are that witnessed the wedding, I'm not quite sure. Why it wasn't their family, I'm not quite sure. It might have been some sort of church tradition. These could have been elders, deacons at the church or something, but I haven't researched into them. But as far as I can see, these are not related people who are down as as witnesses as you normally expect to see. Very simple life at Devonport. So we've got them both living in the Devonport enclave in 1841, not far apart. This is where the various nonconformist chapels were based, and then Herbert saw out his life at South Hill Buildings here in Stoke Damerel. This is the church where he was christened, and for 30 years, excuse me, 30 years. That's where they lived, 5 South Hill Buildings. All seems quite straightforward, but certainly after his death, the way the family sort of went on seems not entirely straightforward, and there's certainly much delving that could be done. So first of all, we've got his death. He died of general derangement of health and congestion of the liver, aged only 56. So I don't know whether there's anything there by way of an occupational disease or whatever. But you see the first signs of things not quite being, I don't know, as you'd expect them to be in the family. What we've got here is the death recorded by Anne Rockett, sister-in-law, and present at death, and she lived at 5 Trafalgar Place. So you think, well, why wasn't one of the sons or daughters that were around actually recording the death? Just one sort of little indicator, shall we say, that I don't know, perhaps things weren't all they ought to be in this family. Anyway, here's the children, and we'll say a little bit about some of them. Well, here they are anyway. This is good old Herbert Swaffield again, and then a Charles, and eventually we get down to Beatrice towards the end, who's our relation. But I've had to write this down. I'm sorry, this is going to be a bit of death by PowerPoint because I just can't remember all of it, because a lot of it's quite complicated. So let's look at the vicissitudes quickly before we finish of the Rockett children. First of all, at the time of the 1861 census, they had 6 children at that time, but only 3 of them were at home. 3 of them were living at other places around the Plymouth area. Two were living together, and one of them was on their own. Then at the 1871 census, so this is when both parents are still alive. Now they've got 8 children, but only 4 of them are at home. 4 of them have gone elsewhere, and certainly the older ones will have been getting to the age where that is not a surprise, but nevertheless, only 4 at home in 1871. Then at the time of the this is where it starts to get really interesting. At the time of the 1881 census, Charles, Charles, David, Beatrice, Ebenezer, and William. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the children were living with their uncle Robert at 181 Norwood Road. So they're up in London now. So their father died in 1880, and here we are in 1881. We've got 5 of the children living with Uncle Robert up at 181 Norwood Road. No sign of Mrs. Rockett. Rachel, just can't find her in the 1881 census at all. Probably there's been some gross misspelling of the name that's made it very hard to find her. But up to now, I've not found her at all in the 1881 census. So she's gone missing in 1881. She's certainly not at the family home at 5 South Hill Buildings. She's not there at all. Other people are living there now. And 5 of the children are all up with Uncle Robert. And what makes it even more interesting is here's the census, and now up in, it's not that easy to read. So this is 1 Matcombe Terrace, which became 181 Norwood Road. Robert W. Rockett, head, widow, age 60, an annuitant, so he was drawing a pension, came from Devonport. That's great. But then we've got Charles R., son, David W., son, B.C., not even Beatrice Courtney or Beatrice C., but B.C. Rockett, daughter, unmarried, age 20. And the other 3 on the next page, again, it just gives their initials and says that they're either sons or daughters of Robert, and that is not the case. They're not his children at all. So you've got 2 things here. Why are they called his children when they're his nieces and nephews, and why have we not got full names? Which you can see is it's just most unusual not to have the full names. You just got this BC from a crossed out Edward. So I don't really know what the census enumerator was doing or what questions he was asking Robert, but very, very strange situation in 1881. So they've all gone up to London to live with Uncle Robert, who's calling them his sons and his daughters. So moving on. This is interesting. I won't keep you much longer, but Herbert joined the Navy and died age 35. So this is the eldest son. Died age 35 in 1855 from overexertion and excitement after his ship ran aground at Bantry Bay in South West Ireland. So that's an interesting thing to die from. And if, again, I won't read this in all its detail, but this is about it running aground, where it talks about this illness. They brought him back. He was obviously alive. So senior engineer of the Leander, that's the ship he was on, died Thursday at the Royal Naval Hospital, Stonehouse. So that's back in Plymouth. From an illness which it is stated on the authority of the staff surgeon of the ship was caused by overexertion on the occasion of the Leander striking the Hornet Rock at Bantry Bay. Basically, he was in charge of manning the pump, so he had a responsible job and was obviously feeling the stress. And I mean, the boat survived. Lots went on, but poor Herbert died of from the shock or whatever. I'm not entirely sure. Buried with full naval honours. So this is the boat that ran aground, the Leander. Here's yet more information about it, because I won't read now, but it's quite interesting. But I will look at this. We've got Lord Randolph Churchill, which I think was Winston Churchill's father. This is at a sort of like a House of Commons committee in the House of Commons. Asking this question, said the Leander built only the same year the accident happened, was completed for £191,000, but in the same year the Admiralty spent £9,000 on her. What's all this all about? To which the Admiral responds, the noble Lord spoke of the Leander, of the great scandal of her costing within a short time of her construction over £8,000. Yes, but he did not tell the reason. Accidents will happen, and ships as to other things, and an accident happened to that ship when she was with the squadron off the coast of Ireland. She ran aground on a rock coming into Berehaven by the west entrance and knocked a hole in her bottom. You do not suppose you could repair her for a mere nothing. And that sum represents the cost of repairs to the ship after the accident. So most indignant admiral there, explaining why money had to be spent on this ship so soon after it was actually launched. So interesting stuff. So it's there on, if you look at HMS Leander on Wikipedia, you'll see all about it. So we've got Herbert dying from his overexertion. Alfred moved to London, so that's why he wasn't there in the 1871 census. He moved to London with his brother Charles, and Alfred then went on to work and die up at Sheffield, working in the steel industry. Mary was married for just 4 years, from 1878 to 1882, and had 2 children. But here's another interesting, that they were married in London, but her husband only 4 years later died at Devonport, so she obviously went back to Devonport, having married in London. She's not there in the 18. So she's not numbered in the 1881 census because she's married to her husband, but clearly in 1878 she was in London. So there's yet another member of the family up in London just before 1880. David's first wife was illegitimate and brought up by Matilda Wilson, in whose home he was born. So as was often the case, and in that sense, it's not such a surprising thing. Here we've got an illegitimate child not being brought up by the mother and father, but that's not an entirely surprising thing at that time. So his first wife was illegitimate. Double click. His second wife was the family servant called Maud, who was quite a lot younger than he was. So when David died, she lived with her stepson Walter, who was about her age. So and they went on into the 1950s. I think she even died in 1970, I think. So the family knew Maud and Walter as a pair, but actually it was stepson and stepmother, even though they were pretty much the same age. So they lived on at 181 Norwood Road. Meanwhile, Ebenezer, interesting character, married Laura Morgan, and incidentally, David's first wife her surname was Morgan back because of her illegitimacy. So she was related. She had this name Morgan there. Her mother was Morgan. And so you've got this link with the Morgan family, who were really quite a well-to-do family who came from Bath. So it gets really quite strange, really. So you've got the Morgan family from Bath. Ebenezer married into it, so quite a well-to-do family here. So this was Aunt Louis. She was Laura Louis Morgan. So the family knew her as Aunt Louis, whose sister Marjorie married Lord Sands of Ombersley Court, Worcestershire. So he married into, really up married. He was quite a senior civil servant in the Colonial Office, so he did have a very good job in London. And but he came to a sticky end. He died at Collyton in Devon in a bicycle accident when he was on holiday at Sidmouth, and the inquest was held at Collyton, and apparently his bike ran into a block that had been used as a sort of brake for a cart. His bike went into a block. It knocked him off. He survived for a little while, but eventually died of head injuries as a result of this bicycle accident. I don't expect he had a helmet on. So poor Ebenezer died whilst away on holiday, and there's an actual letter to the Colonial Office explaining to them why he wasn't coming back to work. So it was very sad end for Ebenezer. So there's all the Rockett children. Obviously, I've left Beatrice out, who's obviously our direct line. Compared with all the others, she seemed to have had a very straightforward life. Although there she was with all her brothers and sisters in 1881, having decided to move up to London. So I thought that would be quite interesting to run through that. And there's still potentially much there to find out about this very diverse family. Yeah, William died aged 30 in 1895 at 181 Norwood Road. So he died at a young age. I don't know what he died of. I haven't got his death certificate. And so coming toward the end now, 181 Norwood Road in 1891 was quite a full house, quite an eclectic mix. Well, first of all, 183 next door, we had David Rockett, and he was working in the railway industry. David Rockett with his wife and David Walter here, living at 183 at this time. Not surprisingly, they couldn't get into 181 because we had Rachel there, having moved up now from Devon, reappeared. If you recall, I said she disappeared in the 1881 census. Well, she reappears in London with her family in the 1891 census, along with daughters. Now we've got the right daughters and so on done. We've got her daughters, Mary, Beatrice, son Ebenezer, son William, the grandson, Frederick, who was Mary's son, her husband having died, the one who was only married for 4 years. And then you've got William Richard, our great grandfather, there as a boarder, anticipating his marriage in a couple of years' time to Beatrice, and another boarder, William H. Brown. Don't know who he is. Don't think he's related. But there you go, a house full at 181, and this is the house they're all crammed into. This is 181 with 183 next door. We see it was one Matcombe Terrace originally because it's obviously different from the house next door. This is what it was like in the Lloyd George survey of 1910. Private house, occupier was David William Rockett. So by 1910 he'd moved back into the house, other brothers and sisters having moved on. He was only the leaseholder. The freehold was with the British Equitable Assurance Corporation Limited. And what's always worth looking at is this one here, is what the house was like and what state it was in. Whoops, sorry. Go back. What state it was in. So there's a little bit here about how many rooms on each floor and so on. And this at the end that you often get, shabby repair. So it's very rare to find a house that it says is in excellent repair. Most of our relations seem to live in houses that needed to be decorated. I don't know why they came up with this shabby repair so often, but perhaps it was. But there we are. So that's where they were all living in 1891, and lived on for right up into the 1950s. So in the 1901 census, things are a bit back to normal now. At 181, we've got David Rockett now with his wife and his children living at 181. So things have settled down, and he's still working on the railways. This is a very poor photo of some of the Rocketts. This is almost certainly Rachel, who died in 1909. So this is taken with just before 1909. So this is the matriarch, the mother from Devon. and various ones. He's definitely a Rockett, and I think he is as well. Not sure about this guy. He looks vaguely familiar, frankly. I think I've seen him in other photos. But it's not a very good photo, but it's the only one I've got of the Rockett family, and it'd be nice to get a few more of these people formally named. Definitely Beatrice and William aren't there. So this is some sort of selection of occupants of 181 Norwood Road, I would suggest, with the photo probably being taken there. So Rachel came up from Devon, lived at 181, then moved up to live with some of the relations who moved out to here, whose address escapes me, Rolls Court Avenue, Brixton Tabernacle, where they went to church up here. But for a while, almost until she died, but she did go back to Rolls Court Avenue right at the very end. She was in an old people's home up here in, I think this is Peckham, can't quite read it. It's up in Camberwell. Yes, I think it's Peckham Road, Camberwell. This again is the end of the Old Kent Road here, off into Deptford. So she did go to an old people's home for a little while. I think she was losing her memory, shall we say, a bit of dementia setting in towards the end, but she was pretty old. And there she is, buried at Norwood Cemetery. Not straightforward, as you might guess. So she's there with her son-in-law, herself, and two of her grandchildren, who didn't live to very long, but died very young. So there's a grave in Norwood Cemetery. So that's it. Thank you for bearing with me for nearly an hour and a half. What this is, most of the material in this presentation has come out of what I call picture biographies that I've got stored on Google Drive. And what I will do is give you all access to these picture biographies on my Google Drive, so that you can, if you want to, go and have a look at them, where there's yet more detail, like all the census returns and so on, of these various characters in our ancestors' history. So I'll send you around those links, and thank you very much for listening. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Malcolm. Anybody got any questions they want to ask Malcolm?
No, but are you ready to find out the really bad bits about the Addiscott family?
You've got some more, have you, Wendy? Then tell me, by all means.
You do realise they actually burnt Addiscott down.
Oh,
which is why
what, the village? The village
yes.
at Addiscott. Yes, well, it
yes.
burnt down about 3 times, I understand.
Yeah, one time they definitely did it.
They definitely did it, did they?
Oh yes.
That's
well
why
it's well known among all the. It's come down through generations.
Yeah, right.
And that's why they ended up in London.
All right.
They left and went to London straight away.
Right.
The only thing that was left was some farm buildings and the manor house. That's it. Everything else was gone.
Yeah, I understand. That's one reason. It was a reasonably flourishing village at one time, but now you go back there and there's next to nothing there now, because they couldn't keep rebuilding it.
No, they've just sold it again, and I think it's been cut up a bit now.
Mm-hmm.
I was there a couple of years ago, and I was talking to the then person who owned the farm,
right?
And then I think he must have retired, and he's sold bits of it off to various people. So, and then they just sold the manor house too. So, which was very nice house, but. Right. And if you want to look into the Courtenay family too, Beatrice's second name.
Yes.
Because they are one of the premier families of Devon. So somehow they're connected.
Yes, that's right. Because if I recall right, there's a farm, an Addiscott farm near Morton Hampstead,
Yes.
and it's the Courtneys that are associated with Morton Hampstead, as far as I
Yeah.
recall. And so there's this. How do you get this connection between Addiscott near Oakhampton with
Yeah.
the Addiscotts at Morton Hampstead? You know, how are they? How are the? You know, what's the connection there? And as you say, that's where the Courtneys. That's where the
Yes.
Courtneys are. Yeah. So
And
yeah,
the
that's a long way back.
Swaffield name, it was a Swaffield that went off to Wales.
Yeah.
And everyone in Wales with the name is directly descended from him.
Mm, yeah.
So there's quite a few of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, they seem to have flourished quite well in the Welsh valleys. Yeah.
They did.
The mining
yes.
industry. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting as to why they went off into the mining industry, isn't it? Really, because that was hardly a low risk activity to go into.
There was trade between Devon and the south of Wales, and I imagine there was a lot of children. Maybe he just got fed up and decided to strike out on his own.
Yeah, yeah,
hopped a barge across.
Yeah, because I think one that went across to South Wales actually was one of the Addiscotts that originally went up to Chatham. So he'd been up to Chatham to go in the dock. You know, that makes sense to go from Devonport up to Chatham. And then he decided he was off to South Wales. Yeah.
Yeah. But what you were talking about was very interesting. My cousin Jennifer Vivian's daughter, she lives in Greenwich.
All right.
And her son lives in Florida.
Right, yeah.
Jenny is a quantity surveyor.
Oh, right, yeah, in the blood.
So somehow it's all connected.
Yes, yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know. But, all your family connections are very interesting too. So.
There we go.
I don't know.
We could. Yeah.
I'd like to get more, but unfortunately, my grandmother, being my grandmother, destroyed everything.
Oh dear, yeah, that's a shame.
So nothing was left.
Yeah. Well, we were saying how Auntie Beattie had a lot of family memorabilia, and I think our Uncle Edgar disposed of a lot of that when he was clearing her house out when she passed away. But I know my mother used to say, "Oh, Auntie Beattie was the one that had all the family photos and so on." And now, of course, it's hard to lay your hands on any of that. You know.
Yeah, I know. Very sad, but yeah. My grandmother was weird, so there you go.
You have to live with what you've got, don't you?
You do.
Anyway,
you do.
Anyway, well, thank you for getting up so early, Wendy, to come and join us. It's great to have you with us.
No, it was very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, that's all right. So it's warm weather down over there, is it, at the moment? Yeah.
Yes, in the 30s.
Yeah.
Centigrade. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit too hot.
Yeah. Still, I suppose summer's coming to an end now for you.
Well, yes, I think so. Hope so.
Yeah.
So, cousin, I've never met Wendy, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet all of you too. It's really good the family's pulled all connections in too.
Yeah.
As I said, there wasn't many Addiscotts left from my side. They all had problems, so there's not many of them left.
Well, that's the thing. It's obviously there certainly wasn't. There can't have been many procreative males in the Addiscott family, or else there'd be more of them around.
Yeah, there was only my father was the only boy in the whole family. So, and of course, Spanish flu, war wiped the rest of them out.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And then Edgar didn't have any children, so
no,
that was it.
Yeah. Well, that's right. The First World War and the flu got rid of Stuart and Douglas. Yeah. Okay. You've stopped recording, have you, David?
No, I've been recording. Sorry.
Oh, you're still recording. I don't know that it matters. I just wanted to forget.
I should stop it recording. So it's Addiscott Beach in Victoria. Is that named after one of the relatives then?
I believe so.
Wow.
A disinherited one, apparently, from what I can understand. Nobody actually realised that it was there for a long time. I was just driving down there one day and saw it and thought, well, that's not a common name.
No, it's not.
And
Just
then
as you're saying, one of them might have been sent by His Majesty across.
Yes, smuggling apparently.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Oh, yes.
And it was
down in
the
Plymouth.
family disinherited him not because he did it, but because he got caught.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Yes.
Which generally runs along the lines of what they're like. Yes.
Amazing.
Okay.
So,
Well, we better finish at this point. I'll stop the recording now, certainly. Otherwise, it'll fill up my laptop. And I'll liaise with putting it up somewhere then, Malcolm, so that people who weren't able to join can watch.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, David, if you can put it on YouTube or.
Yeah, I'll do it like I did last time. If you want.
Then and let everyone know where you've put it.
Yeah.
Or let me know, and then I can send it round to.
Yes, exactly.
I've certainly got all the connections on my side of the family that I can send it round to.
Yeah, I'll let you know. Right.
And I'll also send round where I've got my material, so that if anyone is interested, they can go and look